already or not? No. So, welcome everyone. Welcome to the YouTube audience. As per usual, anyone is more than welcome to join. Also in the live course, you're also more than welcome to speak up at any point in time during this meeting. The one ask is that if there is a call for consensus, you don't raise your hand, don't raise your voice, no anything, because that is the Prometheus team thing. Finding consensus. Beyond that, non-Prometheus team members should be speaking up more, not less. We very much look forward to hearing what you have to say. Also, everyone is more than to help me write the meeting notes, and I'm not seeing Chris, which means I might only notes, which is only a strong incentive for all of you to help me do this. If you shoot me your email address, which with you are logged into this call, I can also give you edit access to the meeting document, which makes it easier. So all that being said,
just to clarify, Chris is excused and he will not join at all today.
Okay.
Can you edit the document settings so that anybody with a Prometheus IO can edit?
That should be the case. Prometheus tier. No, I can only do anyone on the internet can comment, or I can say anyone within Prometheus.io can edit. Prometheus team @ is invited. So if you use the address which is subscribed to Prometheus team @ you are an editor. Or you just drop it in into chat and I do it manually. Or anyone else who is using their Prometheus IO account can also do it. No, actually, Ben, you should be able to edit it because it's in the right folder, so you should have full edit access with you at Prometheus IO.
For some reason, I don't.
Okay. Okay, but let's fix this outside of the actual call. I'm trying to match who is here with who actually wanted to talk about a thing. But we don't have good overlap, which is also a function of it being summer. But no. Julian is here, Matthias is not here, Ganesh and Chris. Okay, let's start with default alerts and Prometheus self-care. That is the least bad.
Except that we discussed that last time.
We didn't mark it as such, did we? Let me see. As you can probably tell, I had a meeting which ran right up to this call. No, we didn't. Proposal process, remote storage out of experimental, one push API, numbers and duration that shows the same, underscore created from open metrics and Prometheus conformance program. But you also put in the, okay. We did talk about it in the context of, we did talk about it in March, but in the context of data corruption and when the disk is full. We didn't talk about this, but we can also skip it. I mean, it's also about disk space, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Yeah, then let's just mark it as talked about. For anyone who joined for the first time, this is not how those calls usually run. We have Björn and Julian, so we can talk about time zones in Prometheus. We can talk about static arithmetics for timestamps and durations. Björn, you're the tiebreaker. Which do you want?
I mean, we will have enough time to discuss both, right?
Okay, so then let's start with static arithmetic. I'm going to copy it over and you can just get started. There we go.
Could we quickly explain, because Jan asked us, how are those discussion topics appearing out of thin air?
Yes, that's a very good and very valid question. So we have a document where we have a humongous backlog, which we keep working through, and basically we toss random bits and pieces in, write down sometimes a little bit, as you can see, sometimes a lot, from just to give context of to the overall topic, and then every team member can write their name in, and whatever gets the most votes is what is talked about first. As we are through with a lot of major things, it equals out. Like previously, we might have had 9 or 8 votes for one single topic, and now we're basically all between 2 and 4. So it's not as obvious what to start with. And also, I'm usually trying to match who is in the call with who proposed the thing and also who voted for the thing, because it's useless to discuss something if no one who actually cared about it is in the call. But yeah, no apology needed for ignorance or anything. It's a good question. I should probably try and make this part of the intro, actually. So Björn, do you just want to read out your notes from back then, and then we get started?
Let me quickly recap what this is about. Didn't we discuss this last time?
I don't think so.
Or we discussed it somewhere else? I'm
We
not sure.
didn't discuss it in this context, but that's the other thing with our long tail. There are make numbers and duration that shows the same. That's also from you, and that's what we discussed last time.
Okay, this is kind of the follow-up item. Now I get it. Yeah, okay. So what we do provide the context. We discussed last time that numbers and like naked numbers and duration literals are actually should just be the same, essentially, as a very simplified way of writing expressions. Like the first expression that we have in the meetings now, like start minus 3 hours, the 3 hours is already using that, right? That proposal for 3 hours, writing 3H or 300, no. What is 3 times 3,600? So 10,000 something, whatever, would be 10,800, right? That would be exactly the same. But that is what we discussed last time. So this is now about doing arithmetic on durations. Like so we already have durations literal in the famous range selector, right? So you say rate queries total 3 minutes, 3M, right? But you cannot write rate queries total 3 times 3M, which is usually also not required because everyone can just do this in their head and write it down directly, right? The problem is if you create those queries from a templating system. If the templating system can do arithmetic, great, then you can make your templating system do the calculation. But sometimes templating systems can't do this, like famously the Go templating system or the Grafana templating system. And then you would ask Prometheus to do the math, but Prometheus doesn't do math on durations. And I think this might be just by chance, but there is also an underlying reason, which is that what the query engine is doing when it looks at a query, the first thing it's doing, it calculates what range of time it has to access in the TSDB. And that's a completely static analysis. So if I now write queries total 3 times 3 minutes, then the engine first had to do some arithmetic to find out that this looks back 9 minutes, and then has to retrieve 9 minutes back for this rate query. So this kind of the revolutionary thing about this is that we need some evaluation to be done before we start to access the TSDB. So this would require us to have that expressions that use this are not needing the TSDB on their own, which is a completely new requirement, I think. If an expert in the query engine can correct me, even better. Having said that, I even think we could but that would be next step to do something where you could even access the TS2B. That would be something like subqueries, right? Where you have a multiple step evaluation process to do this. But as the very first thing, I would just do it, and this is why it's called static. Do enable static arithmetic, right? So that an expression like the one that is two different expressions actually, right? Would just work, right? Where you can do start -3 hours, for example, which is very handy given the new add modifier, and also, yeah, what many people asked for, having arithmetic. You can write arithmetic in Grafana dashboard templates, and Prometheus will do the math for you. That's the idea. And if there are, like, I don't know, who is the engine expert here? Perhaps Julius knows most, or Julian. I don't know. If you already see this is completely impossible without rewriting the engine, please let us know now. Okay, done. What do you think?
I think that this should be possible to do. Just parse the query and simplify all the scalar operations that we see on the way. Should be doable.
Can you explain why this wouldn't work on the parser level? Like PromQL can be parsed, and then the parser could kind of like do the arithmetic in like 3 hours out of 3 times 1 hour.
Because the parser does not know the start of the query and that kind of things. We want also to use like the start, the end in the query, the step, that kind of things. Like I think the start -3 hours is like not really a use case, but step 3 times the step could be a nice addition in your queries.
Okay, I see. Yeah.
I mean, start -3 hours, I think is a use case, but anyway, the interesting thing is that start looks like a function call that would go into the TS2B, but that's the trick, right? This is just syntactic sugar that start looks like a function call. In reality, it's kind of, yeah, a statically retrieved thing from the query parameters. So that would still count as a static expression. So, I mean, the parser could do this simple math, right? If that was Matthias' question, I think that would be one way of implementing it, that the parser realizes this is just static, scalar, arithmetic, and I'll just do this. But I don't know, like that's an implementation detail. I would think if there's no reason why this shouldn't be possible, I think we should greenlight it, and whenever somebody can, they should implement it.
Yeah, I think that you summarized it. I think it's mostly a case of someone who wants to do it can just do it.
Yeah, what was actually our decision on the literals?
Just a moment.
We like the idea and intend to explore it in the design. Okay, there. So somebody needs to write the design doc. So it's, I guess it's kind of a requirement to have the literals and numbers being the same. Would be weird to do this without the other. But then it could go into the same design doc if we like this.
Yeah, I was about to suggest precisely this, that we make a consensus that this, we like the idea and it should be explored in the numbers and duration literals, the same design document. Do we have...
Julius, are you actually awake?
Julius is a bit sick and he's only listening with one ear.
Oh, okay. Because I guess, hello, Julius probably has most historical context on this being either super easy or super weird to implement. I mean, I guess if it were super bad, he would do something now.
Julius, can you write a quick +1, -1? Okay.
I mean, yeah, you could, as said,
Karen, do
like,
you want to give the 20-second summary so Julius can?
I mean, Julius can also, after, I mean, the meeting is just there to find an initial consensus, and whoever isn't here temporarily or not at all could anyway still raise their concern.
Yes, there will be the design doc in the middle, so.
Fair. So consensus. We like the idea and consensus. We like the idea and intend to explore this in the make numbers and duration literals the same design document. All agreed? Anyone disagreeing? Good, good. So, next one. We can talk about hysteresis. Any interest? Okay.
Shouldn't we talk the time zones?
We can also talk to, oh yeah, we said we would talk to time zones, you're right. So yeah, time zone. I'm going to copy it over, but you can already take it, Julian. I copied it over, you can just read it out if you want.
So users are asking for time zone support. And so we would need to find a way to implement that. But like I issued the first design document with the simplest approach possible, which is to just let the user choose the time zone. I know that multiple other tracks have been abandoned, like providing time zone aware function where you could pass the time zone like in day of month, that kind of things. And I wonder like what would be the next idea to get time zone support in Prometheus?
So my main question is same as in the initial thing. What precisely you mean by support and where you mean support? Because it's a huge difference if I get this in my local browser versus in an alert which I send versus I can tell the API to actually return data which has been time zoned. I think you need to be more explicit about what specific places would have time zone support. I mean, the obvious one is probably the web front end, and there you can do it through the browser, and you won't impact anyone else. As such, it's a good way to, or a good place to start experimenting. Already, if you're delving into alerts, maybe if you do it aggressively. Okay, we already have UI time zones. Okay. If you do it in recording rules and such, if you go to the really far extreme, you will cause confusion at some point. Even with alerts, like I get an alert and it says 8 o'clock, and obviously I think it's UTC, but it's, I know, it's Indian time, so it's even off by half an hour. That's the kind of thing I'm concerned about.
So
about the layer and where the transition happens.
Up to 6 months ago, the alerts were sent in the local time zone, and then we switched to UTC again. So this was a bug, an unnoticed bug, but like it caused some breakage at my end that we fixed it. But the thing is that I want it mostly, personally, I would use it in the day of month and the hour PromQL functions. This is where it's very confusing, and you need to do calculation to know if you have DST enabled in Belgium or not, and to be able to mark your PromQL alert based on the time.
Perhaps it doesn't make sense to provide a bit of history for, I mean, if you have read, if all of us here have read the design doc, then you have, I think, the context. And there's also a lot of discussion on the design doc already, kind of illustrating how hairy this problem is. But if not everyone has read it, I mean, should I just provide this bit of historical context? So the historical context was time zones are hard. We are not doing them in Prometheus, period, right? Everything is UTC, done. So that didn't fly because, yeah, I mean, so the next step was, so the local time zone in the browser, this is something the browser can actually convert. So we could totally at least allow people in the browser to display the local time zone. And I think that's what we're doing now, right? You can switch to local time zone as a pure display thing.
Yeah, React supports this.
So another thing would be, and I know this from a project that we had internally at Google where people thought, oh, time zone support is super easy. So you could actually put this all into the logic and have like a selection in the browser where you can pick any time zone of your choice, and the code would calculate it, but it would still render it a pure display issue. And I think if you just see it as a display issue, we have contained it nicely, and that's great. And so far, I was pretty relaxed about it. But, and this is what Julian just alluded to, we do have things that are not just display issues, like I want to alert during work hours, right? So what is work hours? This is suddenly a DST thing, and it's not a display issue because the alert fires or doesn't fire, right? Depending if it's work hours or not. And that's where Julian created those crazy Prometheus expression to calculate DST transition in Belgium, right? Or when is Easter Monday? There's even a Prometheus function for when is Easter Monday, which is more not a time zone, it's more like a calendar thing, but I think this goes into the same direction. And then we have our minutes in the hour, right? We have this function in PromQL, which doesn't work in India because it's 30 minutes off, and I think in Nepal it's 50 minutes off or something, right? So there nothing works. Or like there's the stuff, bunch of things that is directly affected by the time zone, and it can be part of the business logic, right? It's even if you know I'm 50 minutes off, okay, you could have an offset, but error budgets, for example, can be tied to the billing period, and the billing period starts on the 1st of the month, midnight, of course. But what is midnight? It's half an hour off, even DST effects and everything, right? So things get really weird, and that's the point where we do need time zone support, not just as a display issue, right? And I think Julian's idea was, as the most simple approach, you essentially set a time zone on as a command line flag, and then everything obeys to that time zone instead of to UTC. And this is where I personally think we get into all those troubles, because now we have to handle cases like the time zone changes at a certain point, right? I mean, this is what governments do all the time. They change time zones, or DST switches happen, and now we suddenly have like suddenly a timestamp is not, what is the word? It's not unambiguous anymore. So Borgmon had troubles like this historically because the natural time zone of Google is Pacific time, which has DST, right? And it's changing. The law changed. I think while I was at Google, they changed the law when DST even starts. So all those things happen all of a sudden. And it's not just having it in the time zone file, which perfectly defines it. It's like, how do we solve edge cases that suddenly an hour repeats, right? And that the time doesn't go up steadily. And I mean, the Unix time always goes up steadily, but the whatever, the day of the month might suddenly go back if you are like, yeah, all those things could happen, right? So this is why, personally, I think if we integrate time zones into business logic, for one, it never has to, like, this is now my personal idea, right? This is not from the design or something. So if somebody else, I should separate this, right? I just wanted to give a neutral summary. So if we want to add to this, we should do it now, and then we should start the discussion. Let's do it that way. Like, any more context that should be provided so that people know what this is about?
I mean, this is more or less mirroring the concerns. As soon as you start mixing UI or as soon as time zones start leaving the UI and enter the actual backend for processing, you will have a bad time to some extent. On the other hand, I see Julian's point of wanting to have a solution which works for him, or for this use case of I accept those things and need a way to do this nicely. What I'm wondering is if there should be a way to, with a large warning bell and experimental flag and blah, simply set a time zone for a running Prometheus instance. And
The thing is that
switched over.
the thing is that as soon as you leave the big tech companies, not anyone is running servers in UTC, and Prometheus is one of the only software running only in UTC. Even when you read the logs, a lot of logs of other applications just use the local time zone.
That goes Björn left. He disagreed so much. No, he didn't. I get what you're saying. I have mixed experience there myself. My point is, or that's precisely why I suggested what I just suggested, that you have this one big switch where you switch a complete Prometheus into a different time zone. And we do this literally behind an experimental feature flag, because it will break, and it will break in different ways. And we have a huge warning when you log in, and you have when you don't log in, but like the UI shows you this size warning different time zone kind of thing. I think mixing time zones within one Prometheus will end up in a really, really confusing and bad state. Also, if we do it centrally, you can conceivably have a second switch, which tells me what to do on the Prometheus remote write layer. Or maybe even potentially on the remote read, because what about the remote data? In what time zone is that data?
How is it linked? The data is still stored in the UTC in the Unix timestamp. The Unix timestamp is the same.
Okay, so okay. I don't think that is obvious. It's good if that is your intention, but like just playing further with this. Now, if I have PromTool and I need to run retroactive recording rules on my data, if Prometheus itself has the storage in UTC, then I also need to signal to PromTool what the default time zone is. If Prometheus itself has everything stored in the local time zone, I don't need to tell PromTool anything special, because I just tell it Tuesday, and the Tuesday which PromTool is using is aligning with the Tuesday which I'm using.
I think nobody's proposing to have the Unix time with an offset, right? So TSV saves everything in Unix time. This will never change, and it's independent of time zones. I think in a way we are still talking about display layer, just about display layers, like in a more like if this alert fires or not is now essentially a display issue, right? If this log line is printed out in local time zone or in UTC is kind of a display issue. It's just not a display issue of the web browser. So I think nobody ever wants to change anything that like would affect the remote write format or how we store stuff on disk. But okay, let's first clarify this.
I disagree on the no one would ever, because I'm convinced that some people would. I'm not saying it's a good idea. I'm not saying we should enable it. I'm just saying if it that most certainly some people would use it. But the other thing which I'm stuck on is when you say display layer. To me, an alert is more or less a special case of a recording rule, because it generates a special time series that's called alert under upper score whatever. And also it happens to send to a generic HTTP endpoint. Both alerts and recording rules generate new data, which is permeated in the local storage.
Yeah.
And
this is why I said it's a kind of display layer. Like this is the problem where things blend together, that now if we run the same Prometheus on the same data again and run the same rule evaluations again, that now, for example, this alert won't fire anymore because the server is now in a time zone where the work hour is 5 hours off. And that's where I think things get really problematic.
Jumping ahead a little bit, I think, just reading a room, I think we will end up at TSDB stays UTC, and you have to completely switch a Prometheus to a new time zone, and everything that Prometheus instance does is happening in that one time zone.
That's something I would not propose. I would actually be against that. So my idea is, I mean, first of all, this doesn't solve the problem because we were talking about big companies that run weird things. They also run in different time zones, right? So if they have this one Prometheus server that collects data from the whole company, they will not like it that all the data is in the same time zone. The people in India want their work hour alerts to fire for Indian work hours, while the people in France want French work hours. And if everything is done by the same Prometheus, or as we have with muting for alerts, by the same alert manager, which we require as a best practice to be one global instance, then nobody has solved the problem. We would then mute in French work hours, not in Indian work hours, but half of the company works in India. So, I mean, I think we are getting a lot of trouble by having this one global time zone, which might not be UTC, and we are only solving half of the problems.
But at that point, would you have a global Prometheus server, and also wouldn't you generate artificial metrics at that point and then use those as part of your alerting rules, as part of your inhibitions and such? That you
we have muting by time in the alert manager for precisely the use case to route alerts to different receivers depending on the time of the day. This is already in alert manager, right? This is one of the reasons why we're talking, that we have those features already. And we want a global alert manager per organization. That's what we recommend. We wouldn't have an Indian and a French alert manager in the global company. Okay, but I mean, this is not the only thing. The other thing is that when you switch the whole Prometheus server to a time zone, you run into this bad habit of having implicit assumption about the time zone. So you run into this thing where you think, I just log this hour, minute, second. And then you switch over the time zone, the global time zone, to a different server. So now you log in a different time zone. And 3 months later, you look at the logs and you don't remember at which time zone was the server when it logged this. So my idea would be that the time zone will stay UTC, the kind of default time zone. And whenever you use a different time zone, it's explicit. Then I could see that the parameter could be log this in local time zone, right? But this is an explicit opt-in where you kind of see I'm now using the local time zone. So it will never by default log in a time zone that might change, and you don't remember. You have to remember in which time zone the server was when it recorded this log line 3 months ago. That's kind of the only thing where I could imagine it might work out.
Actually, like logging was kind of an example, but like most of the log solutions out there are already adding the local timestamp on the logs as well. So we have the timestamp twice. But I think that, like, are you suggesting then that we would add a new PromQL functions that can take the time zone as a parameter?
That might be a possibility to add to all those functions that actually change behavior depending on time zone, to add a parameter there, which could be use system or local time zone, or you could be a specific time zone. Yeah. Or actually, I mean, this is again, like time zone and location are different things, so that needed to be thought out as well. But yeah, in principle. Jan wants to say something.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if it's viable to just make the specification of times, like for the alert manager when a route should be muted, for example, and to use ISO 8601 specifications. Then what Prometheus doesn't really matter, but you can specifically define the time zone for which this should be muted.
Exactly. Like this is what I propose.
Oh, okay.
Whenever you express a timestamp, you express explicitly in which time zone this is.
Or if
Whenever
you
you
don't,
use a function that changes behavior depending on time zone, you express the time zone you want it in. If you don't express anything, it's UTC.
Yeah.
That's what I would do to support the use case of having different time zones. But I think we are like, yeah, this is the reason why we never touched it, because we didn't want this default behavior where it's suddenly implicit and you look at some behavior and you can't see under which time zone this has happened. Like whenever something happens on a specific time zone, it's explicit. That's the rule I would suggest to follow.
The one risk, and you touched on this, is that means we have a divergence between the system's understanding of a time zone versus the Prometheus binary's understanding of a time zone. So laws change, blah blah blah. Beyond this, I think it's probably the least bad way to do this.
Which one?
What Jan and you just suggested, that you have explicit time zones, that time zone database is within Prometheus, it's drawn from whatever location within Prometheus, and if and only if you specify a specific time zone, then you actually operate on a time zone, and else you have UTC. And also hide this behind feature flag, blah, 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 because this should not be enabled by default, in my opinion.
I mean, at least for playing with it.
Yeah, like, I don't know, half a year or what have you. Julian, would this actually solve this? And the other question, what happens if you just write a generic query which does not have explicit timestamps, only relative time?
So I think that in the day of month Cronquel function, you do not pass a timestamp explicitly, so you don't need the RFC formatting. And Alert Manager already supports the RFC formatting, so you can pass the time zone there.
Yeah, it depends on which RFC, right? Because some RFCs support the time zone, which already had to include if this is DST or not, right? You cannot say the time zone and then it will magically calculate if it's now DST or not. For that, you usually need a location. So saying like, give me the local time in Brussels is actually very different from giving me the local time in Central European time, because CET never has DST, because CET with DST is called CEST, which you have to provide. Like it will happily accept the timestamp in CET at a time where CET is actually CEST.
Yes.
Well, if you have a location thing and you say, give me the time for Brussels, it will take into account when daylight saving time starts in Brussels. So this is all super non-intuitive, right? Where I can see the idea of let's just switch the whole server. I think this is very easy handling-wise in that moment for the users, because they just get what they're also used to from many other software. But I think the problem is that the two things I said is we are now having weird behaviors of like time that is jumping around that might not, we don't know yet, like it might not play well with some parts of what we're doing. And the other thing is that what I said like just 2 minutes ago, it's now implicit, and I don't know in what time zone this server was when it created this piece of data, which is, well, like I think we should try to avoid this and try to be explicit. At least for now. I mean, that doesn't prevent that we can later still do a, let's replace UTC by some other time zone. Well, if we now open the box of Pandora and do this, yeah, then okay, it's experimental, of course, but it will be very hard to take back once people have adjusted to that operationally.
The other possibility would be to have a time zone function in PromQL, and then you can wrap the complete query into your time zone function, or you can even, if you so choose, wrap different parts of your query into different time zones, because that would, you would still explicitly say what time zone you want to operate in, but you wouldn't have this, you wouldn't have to do it all the time and such. I'm not sure if I hate my own idea. It's just something.
What Victoria Matrix has, they have a time zone offset function, but it means that then you would need to do 2 selects in PromQL if you want to apply that to a metric. And that's not something that you actually want to do, like twice the select or like twice the calculation. So I think that the proposal should now be like, should we agree on taking all the timestamp function in Prometheus and just add an optional string parameter where you can put the location?
I mean, this has to be thought through, of course, but spontaneously, I think that would be a sane approach, at least as an experiment. While I think this offset thing of Victoriometrics is the typical Victoriometrics feature creep, it works like nicely in many cases, but it fails in very surprising way in the actual, like in the edge cases, and those are mostly the cases where you have that function in the first place.
Victoriometric is super limited. Like, I don't think you can pass actually like a specific timestamp. You can just return the value for now or for the time of the execution. But like what I would use that for is also like to use like the alert for metric, the alert for state when you have the start of an alert, that kind of thing is where we actually use the time functions of Prometheus. So, okay. So yeah, I suggest we start with a small experimentation with the time zone passed in the time function, and we do not touch any of the Prometheus server, the logs, and etc. And the alerts, they all stay in UTC, but we just add a small touch in the time function of PromQL.
Okay. Real question about the logging. I haven't followed the precise details of the logging library, but can't we just pass in a formatting string that would allow to put the local time into the log format? Isn't that already possible?
We don't enable the users to change that now, and I think if we start allowing them to put any stuff there, we will not understand the logs that we receive, because they will strip the date, they will strip the, I don't know. I'm not sure we should allow the users to configure that, because it will be a lot more difficult to read the logs we receive in the bug reports.
Okay, so right now we log the timestamp, but the format is completely fixed. You cannot customize it. Okay, but I mean, yeah, allowing the time zone there is also some kind of customization, I guess. Anyway, I thought that would have been possible already.
Well, yeah, but then if a user decides to just keep the hour, and then you have a log that crosses 3 days, then you don't know, you cannot read the logs nicely. So I suggest that we don't make that parameterable, so it's easier for us.
I mean, if we have a fixed log format and the log format includes that the time zone and particularly the offset to UTC is part of the timestamp, I would have zero issue. Yeah, Julian just. I would have zero. Is that, you know, this is what we do now, right?
Yes.
But like the timestamp that you see in emails or whatever, where it is in some local time, but the offset to UTC is always part of this timestamp. If that's something we have in the log file, then I would not have any issue with that. But again, I would keep this separate from everything else, essentially. That's the kind of why I don't want this global switch, because then, yeah, we have some we are creating so many corner cases where it might be explicit or might not be, and that's a bit dangerous.
No, if you see the timestamp we have, it has the Zulu time at the end, so it's clear for a lot of people that it's actually UTC, and then I guess that systemd or your Kubernetes logging system would add the local time zone if it needs to.
Okay, TZ is kind of more like location than time zone, right? especially like if you, I don't know if all the libraries are the same, but if you look at the Go time library, the time zone is kind of ignorant of daylight saving time because the time zone always includes if it's EST or not. Like there's no time zone that would represent both sides of the coin. But if you have this location field, it will do the right thing.
But the Golang library enables you to say Europe Brussels or Europe Berlin in the location.
Exactly, right. So you need the user to specify a location if they want to get daylight saving time handled. Well, if you ask the user to provide a time zone, they have to pick themselves if they want PSD or PDT, which would defeat the purpose in most of the cases, right? Yeah, location.
I think we would need to support all of them. Like this ISO format has lots of problems with it, in my opinion. Also location, also explicit time zone in human readable form.
And then how about for alert manager? I mean, I think this is another very obvious use case where if people use the time-based muting in alert manager, they are probably interested in local time because they do this for business hours, right?
So there is a bug in the current release where we use the local time by default, and there is a bug fix that will come in the next release.
Yeah, okay, but what Jan said, right, that we allow there that you specify in those timestamps, that's not timestamps, it's like those, or it's timestamps or intervals that we allow to specify a location or time zone there.
But is there a time format where you can specify a location? I don't think so.
Yeah, that's hard. I think all the RFCs, none of them has a location, but perhaps we can have it like as a field. I mean, this has to be thought through again, but in alert manager, in this whole syntax, we could perhaps say this muting rule is for whatever, India or Brussels or France or whatever, right? And you can specify that, and then it also addresses this global use case where, like, if you have this global alert manager config global, literally true, then every team can use the time zone of their locality and add it to that file. And it's literally just giving them a way of specifying their location. I mean, this would be two relatively like narrowly scoped things we could just play with. And if we realize this is just horrible, we can still revisit this and perhaps have another idea. Okay, if everyone is silent, is that what we should do first?
Yeah, I think to do this right, making this location dependent is the right way to go, because everything else will fall short.
Okay, Richie, would you use your consensus formulation superpowers?
Yes, I'm trying to come up with something which covers everything. I mean, should we just go with trying and doing it by location? Let me take a step back and walk through my mental thought process. I think we should not overly constrain the design document, and I think it's inevitable that we will have a design document. So I think the consensus is probably best if we just write, based on the discussion, we will have a design document and have this discussion, because we didn't find something where everyone was super happy with. And also we have, I think, a third of Prometheus team in this call, and it's a substantial divergence from like long established procedures or behavior or what have you.
Okay, we have already designed, right? This could be modified to
fair,
documenting the discussion so far, and then proposing a first step. I mean, this is not the last step, definitely, and I also could totally expect that we find out this is not the right way. And perhaps in the end, we have to switch the whole server 2 time zone because it's the least bad way. But yeah, I would just like that we experiment with those things first. And perhaps in the design doc, this could be formulated as a first step to try out. And then we can get agreement on that first step in the design doc and then implement it and play with it.
I didn't mean to imply we don't already have a design document. What I meant is a specific way of implement. But I mean, so Julian, you want to have this. So what would you prefer to explore first?
The only place, place where it impacts.
Just point of order. I think the other consensus from the previous point got deleted. I don't know who was that. Can we just all hit undo? Or? I think, Richie, when you copied, then you probably...
That might have been the case. Let me see. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, okay. So, okay, go on. All good.
Thank you.
Julian.
So the only place when I am interested in is inside PromQL. The rest is not really visible to the users, except the browser, but they already have it there. Well, it means what you mean by users, Richie, but if you are like the people who run the queries, it's only in PromQL that it matters.
At least the logs which Prometheus itself, or aren't they timestamped, or do we rely on system timestamps?
It is Zulu time, so UTC.
So it doesn't matter to the users of Prometheus. But explore what you want to explore.
As I have said, I have the timestamp added by systemd anyway, and the information provided by Prometheus is just redundant. So I have the local timestamp provided by my operating system, and I guess that most of the logging solution would also add their own timestamp.
But I mean, to clarify, I would have no problem with a command line flag log in system time zone if that time zone is then part of the timestamp. So you can see that it logged in another time zone, and if the users want it, like that's not a problem, right? As long as explicit. As long as it is explicit.
I don't think we have ever received any request to do that. So.
Okay, because it was part of the discussion before that logging is weird if it's in UTC for some people. Okay, so consensus would be something about modifying or amending the design doc and do this as a first step.
Okay. How about this? Consensus. We intend to explore this area, drawing from the existing design doc, which I will link, and POCs. We will need to discuss the results before forming a strong opinion. We can also delete the second sentence because it's kind of redundant. I feel it makes sense here, but we can also just kill it.
I mean, the problem is that the design doc is essentially proposing let's switch the whole server to the system time zone, right?
Yeah.
So we kind of have to include that the content of the discussion today has to be, the designer has to be updated according to the results of the discussion.
We need to delete the content of this design doc and rewrite it.
That's what I suggested initially, that we draw mainly from the discussion we had and write a new design doc based on this.
I mean, the whole idea of switching the whole server shouldn't be ignored, right? It should be one of the alternatives that the design doc can introduce, even if the preliminary result is not to do it. But design docs can showcase competing alternatives.
Richie, do we want to explicitly say that time zones are a problem that we want to solve in Prometheus, or like provide a way of localizing Prometheus to where the users are? Like, or is that implicit?
I'm not objecting. I mean, I personally don't think time zones are a problem in Prometheus. I always try to, even though I work at Grafana, I always try to push as much functionality and feature set into Prometheus as possible, so you don't rely on any single visualization layer or anything. That being said, in this particular case, I actually believe that it makes sense to keep it there, but that's why it's phrased more softly. But as Julian cares about this, and from context, I think you also care about this. That is basically so maybe historic context for the people who weren't there in all the calls before, even before we started recording and such. We sometimes made the mistakes of overly constraining ourselves by choosing specific words and phrases which constrained future action by an overly specific consensus. We learned from this, and we tried to write consensus as openly and non-restrictive as possible. So the implicit thing is, as long as we don't constrain within the consensus, we open up as much as possible, and then we come back in X amount of time to just So that's why if we say it is a problem, we already say that it is a problem. So if we drop it in 10 years' time, why didn't we solve that problem? Blah, 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 blah. Which
This isn't your first rodeo.
Yeah, it's honestly overdoing it and being overcorrect. But historically, it just we locked ourselves into a corner a few times and realized we shouldn't. Okay, so let me just rewrite this. We intend to and will update. So, how about this? Consensus. We intend to explore this area and will update the existing design document or write a new one.
Yes. Nobody can object.
I mean, it is a positive that we actually, yeah. Okay, but all agreed? Anyone disagreeing? Perfect.
Yeah, I mean, if it's for me, I don't think we need to specify more, because like Julian picked up what we discussed in good faith, and I trust him to like not just write the same design document again now, but reflect what we discussed.
Even if bad faith happens, we are just in the same cycle. Ian, for your benefit, so what is the good thing to do now if you want to, blah, 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 blah. We can create an empty design document, or we can just copy over, doesn't matter. We can list it in the design document list in the Prometheus documentation. And then there is either an existing or a blank slate there to explore the thing. Again, from context, I think you want to work on this with Julian, no? Yes.
Me, Ian, not Jan. Or
I said Ian on purpose. Yes.
okay, sorry. I have no immediate need for time zones.
Yeah.
Okay, so whoever wants to, Julian, you intend to work on this, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would propose to keep it in the existing design doc because it's already linked, right? And even if it's completely edited, fine. But I think what's written in there should still be represented, because maybe we return to it and people should definitely be aware that we thought about this option as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me unconsensus and we try a new consensus. Consensus. We intend to explore this area and will update the existing design document with a new section. And then we are time boxing this because
We'll update the existing design document, period. I mean, there's no reason to restrain that it has to be a new section. It's just
okay, fair. After this, I'm going to time box it. Yeah. Consensus. We intend to explore this area and will update the existing design document. All agreed? Anyone disagreeing? Yay! Good. we are so deep in PromQL changing territory that, Björn, if you want to, we can probably pull this one forward. Else, I think we will arrive at hysteresis based on voting and who is here. And
should we have a short break because we are past the hour?
Yes, thank you for the reminder. I forget breaks usually. So 5 minutes.
So what is UTC?
10 past.
1610 is the to use UTC, right?
We just do relative offset in 5 minutes. 10 past. Unless you're in India, but
Ow.
see you then. Or stick around and chat and banter. Both is fine.
Speaking of Björn's calculation thing.
Recorded. I don't know what.
No. This is so Richie and I were discussing how to do projections into the future graphs, and I was trying to figure out what weird incantation of PromQL I could do to like disk space metric or predict linear disk space. And like I haven't seen a good pattern on how to draw predictions into the future.
Probably with some offset parameters.
Yes, offset magics, and you need to know the timestamp of where the data ends. And like maybe Grafana has a magic variable of, so there's a to and a from variable in Grafana, but there's no like end of the there's no now variable. And the same thing in PromQL is we have a time variable that tells you what time the query is, but there's no now.
No real now. But that's my brainstorming document, right? We need a real now I mean, I think we need a bunch of additional functions, and start and end is just the start. No pun intended.
Have you seen the movie Spaceballs?
Yes, of course.
Are we now?
But you can use the leftover time and the timestamp function.
Yeah, but if you actually want to know now without...
There is no now in TSDB or in Prometheus. It's an illusion.
Okay, but I also need a few minutes break. I mean, we might discuss this actually as part of this. I'll see you in 3 minutes.
Richie, was there some specific reason why you thought I was interested in timestamps? Or was it just because I spoke, or because
Yes.
Okay.
It's so seldom that anyone dares to speak up that there must be a really pressing need. And I'm desperately trying to solve this problem. And here I explicitly call like this tends to be a discussion just amongst Prometheus team, and the amount of non-Prometheus team members which spoke up today is already exceeding my wildest dreams. I mean, historically, when we still had the once yearly thing in person, as you know, I think we always invited people to attend and discuss. And I think they feel more comfortable if they're in the room and have been actually like invited, and they need to enter the building and they need to enter the room and they get their own seat and blah 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 blah. Like everything, I think that makes it more natural to join this conversation. Whereas here it's more or less a broadcast scenario. So anytime someone dares to speak up, my baseline assumption is they have a super pressing need to talk about this.
In my experience, it's having like an existing relationship in terms of like I've worked with someone or I've spoken with someone before. It kind of breaks down the barrier to me not feeling like a total fool by saying something to it's being recorded and with a bunch of people that I respect and I like want to work with on a day-to-day basis. It's like that's the barrier. I don't want to feel like an idiot by saying something. And if I have an existing relationship, I have more trust, so like I'm more likely to say something. I found in my experience.
No, absolutely. Like part of why I do the intro and like I'm spilling my secrets here, but usually when I open anything, you will notice in the future at least that I'm deliberately extra happy, a little bit sloppy, a little bit stumbly, as a deliberate icebreaker. Because if you're not perfect and if you're obviously emotionally involved in a positive note, it's a lot easier for other people to become part of that wave. That's also how PromCon and such is structured, where you have this family vibe, where you have this. I mean, you might have a few hundred people jumping around, but everyone is more or less having this feeling of those are those long lost family and friends which they see every few years, but everything is kind of fitting and everyone is kind of nice, and you have this kind of nice baseline that everyone is kind of knowing each other, and you're invited to the big table. That kind of thing is what I'm aiming for with these. But it's super hard remote. It's so much easier in person.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, no,
Definitely.
absolutely. Ice breaking is yeah.
What about you, Jan?
Sorely needed.
Why did you speak up? Maybe to help give Richie a data point.
Yeah, just making an effort.
Good. So also, Matthias already did his duty, so we will need Kemal and Robert to also speak up at some point during this meeting. You still have 50 minutes left. Just for the record.
Did I hear my name?
Say what?
Did I hear my name?
No, you didn't.
Okay.
I was just saying that Kemal and you need to raise your voice of competence and confidence in the remaining 50 minutes at some point. And I wasn't joking, like feel empowered to speak up. Also, we're 12 minutes past, so let's get restarted. So yeah, let's post the hysteresis on. That should actually not be a super long topic. This came up in a IoT / all the things related discussion. Now I need to explain what hysteresis, whatever is, because I'll just explain. So in proper control systems, like obviously a lot of IT operations and observability and such come from control theory or have huge overlap with control theory. And in particular in mechanical or in pumping systems, like where you have hydraulics and such, you have this feedback loop which can lead to self-destruction. That's also with planes, which then hammer into the ground or lose airstream and just drop. The problem is if the marker where you enable a control and where you disable the control is the same set point, you can run into self-reinforcing patterns and you will have a really bad time. That is not quite the same for alerts. Of course, alerts don't actually directly change the behavior of the system which is observed, at least not unless you have super aggressive automation or you have someone who's just sitting there immediately reacting to that alert. And Prometheus did a hugely beneficial thing where you have for X amount of time. So you don't have this hair trigger of the alert always going on and off immediately. All that being said, what I would like to propose is that we introduce a way for a query which is disabling an alert. So I don't only have my enabling alert or my enabling query for an alert, but I have an actual query which needs to also be true or false or empty or what have you at that time when the alerting condition is also already empty or not returning any data anymore. And before that time, I don't drop the alert. You could see this as a little bit of an inverse words inhibition. So you don't inhibit the generation of the alert, you inhibit the disengagement of the alert. I honestly suspect that this is largely non-controversial, and we'll just say yes, but Callum looks as if there's questions.
I
Also,
think
like
maybe
Julian
it is
had-
misunderstood. I thought you were explicitly wanting another PromQL query that would inhibit.
The disengagement of the alert. So
Inhibit the disengagement.
So let's say you have an alert that the local fire brigade in Vancouver starts going out when you have 3 woods which are on fire. But you don't want to stop them to, no, that's a shitty example. So let's take a data center. You have you go over your F-ray envelope and you are now at 23C, what have you. You don't want to stop this alert at 23C. You want to only stop this alert at 21C. Of course, you want to have that buffer.
Okay, makes sense.
Which is a lot more, like it's super common in anything which touches physical infrastructure, in particular if it relates to anything which is somewhat squishy, air or water or electricity, which are all squishy under this definition. But it's also useful for IT, and also it becomes more useful as Prometheus enters more and more industrial applications, where this is just absolute standard.
This kind of stuff is used quite often in autoscalers. So scale up quickly and scale down slowly. And so the same kind of thought, like Richie says, applies to alerts. I am totally for this.
Yeah, but it's not as easy as just throwing 2 PromQL queries in one alerting rule.
Is it?
Yeah, it's not, because like, what do you do with the labels if the 2 PromQL queries do not return the same labels?
Nah, that's a up to the user problem.
Yeah, I mean, if they don't return the same labels, then that query by definition isn't applicable to this alert. Like that's the same as if you're asking what do you do if you have 2 or 3 different alerts and one of them goes away, then that alert goes away because you don't have those labels anymore. If you don't have a hysteresis rule which matches, then you simply don't return data. From Prometheus' point of view, it doesn't matter if that data is not existing, if the values are wrong, or if the labels are wrong. You don't get a result, and so the trigger condition isn't true.
So Julian wrote that inverted for cooldown period would be his preference, but perhaps both could make sense. I mean, it's kind of we could offer both features, right? If we wanted to. It's not a contradiction.
That's from the initial copy. I do agree that we need to have a way to just time base this. And then at the latest, we're at the point where we need to discern what logic we want to run between those. Is it and, is it or, whatever. It might even be worth it to just allow the user to choose. Like, do they want to have 5 minutes and under 21C? Or do they want to have 3 hours or under 21C? Like that kind of thing is nothing we can actually we cannot actually make that call for the user. So we should just offer all of those permutations and be done with it.
Yeah, perhaps if the like switch off condition also has a fall, then we would have both, right? And the default is that the switch off the same as the switch on condition.
And if you allow more than one switch off condition, you can just have an empty query or something which is just like, sorry, not an empty, it's something which always returns true. And you give it for 10 hours. And so after 10 hours, the alerts always go away, of course. That's how your system is, I don't know, whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I mean, we have to see how this works out in principle, but I think it could be both. Perhaps there's an elegant way of having it both.
No. I mean, we can just start off with one and see what happens, or we just write the config so you can run more than one and again be done with it. I mean, this even gets us into territory where we can have different.
No, I think we just want one.
Yeah, let's start with one.
I mean, if we actually go for the hysteresis PromQL query, then we don't need the cooldown period and the flapping detection, I think. Not for the moment, at least.
Yeah, you don't know that. Of course, you don't know what use cases will have. But okay, so let's say we have a query condition and we have a time condition, and both of them are optional. So you can have neither, or you can have only a time query, or you can only have a PromQL query, or you can have both of them.
But what do you mean a time condition?
For 10 minutes. And if I only say for 10 minutes, then every alert must be on for 10 minutes. If I say query,
but that's what we have now.
No, for cooldown.
Yeah, cooldown for.
Yeah. So
we
we have a condition under which the alert stops firing. Only if that condition is met or not met, whatever the Boolean direction is, even if the main condition would not make the alert fire, and that other condition can be empty to not have an effect, but it also has a for, which then, if you leave the condition empty and just have for that other part, the for, then it would be your cooldown period. I think that's the idea.
Yes, precisely.
Okay.
Chris, then you have those 4 states. You can cool down immediately. You don't have any cooldown. You have cooldown based on a query. You have cooldown based only on time, and you have a cooldown based on time and the query.
When is that wrong paste?
So what?
Ben pasted something that I don't get the context of.
He's drawing, I think, an example.
That's so.
You probably need to screen share if you want to put this onto the video. But we could also just write out the consensus, because I think we
Sounds
have
like a game.
Yeah, I mean, there might be in the details, but I think we all got the idea, and we should play with it.
What I am against is adding more status for the alerts. I think we will break too many things if we have something else than firing and pending. And maybe for Prometheus 3, we can add more status, but for the Prometheus 2, even behind the feature flag, I would not change the status.
I mean, internally, we have to track that the main condition
Yes.
isn't met right now, but not the switch off condition.
You also have to track the labels, but you need them for emitting the alert anyway, but you also need them for matching the cooldown condition.
Yeah, I think we will run both queries all the time, and not only if the inhibition is running, because otherwise you will have uneven load on your Prometheus server, and it will be more loaded when you have inhibition alert going on, and that's not cool.
But you cannot run just the query for the alert, because the data which triggered the alert might be completely gone.
Well, you can run it and not do anything with it.
I mean, you need to run the alert queries anyway, but my point is, if you have an alert which has been triggered, and the underlying data for that alert goes completely away, you still need to cache the labels and the last value of that alert.
Yeah, but I think we're doing this anyway for the for persistence, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, that's an implementation detail that has to be thought through.
So, also no cooldown.
I actually wouldn't word it that way. I would say we always have both, just that the default time is 0 and the default query is always true, essentially.
I would argue.
Well, always true does not have labels.
Sorry, what was that?
Precisely.
Always true does not have any labels.
Yeah, I mean, the default query is the same as the main alerting query.
Then you would run it twice.
Yes, logically it's the same. The default is the result of the cooldown query is exactly the same as the result of the main query.
My thinking was if something is not defined, it's just not inhibiting, and so you can just disregard it from both the user logic and the actual code.
I just mean that the description of 4 states is overly complicated if we just say actually only have one stage which is cooldown on PromQL and a time, and the default time is 0 and the default query is the same as the triggering query.
Okay, let's rewrite this in a different. I think I'm. Let me write this to. Like this, RC2119, like so, as I mark. See Matthias? Oh, he's gone.
I mean, yeah, I'll just try to word something on myself.
Also fine.
Yeah, I don't think we should tell the users that every alert has now to queries. I think that the second query should be really optional and be called exactly like what it is.
Yeah. Maybe we are over engineering for the intents and purposes of this call.
Yeah. I think the first alert could be called the precondition, and then we have a for cooldown at the end. The question is like, which one is the actual alert now? Because what I see now is that the actual alert that we have now is the long-term alert, and we need an alert to trigger that one.
No, the alert which we currently have is what enables the alert. And the query which we would be introducing is the one which prevents the alert state from
Okay.
going away. Everything else breaks user expectations. We cannot change the meaning of the existing configuration. And the beauty of allowing those as optional is you can simply import existing configuration and never even know that hysteresis would be possible, because those values are not required. If they are not set, then the query equals true with labels and such, but it equals true underscore with underscore magic underscore labels, and the time equals 0 and done. So it's just as if they weren't existing. That was what I was trying to wordsmith earlier. But for the intents and purposes of the consensus, we intend to support hysteresis based on query and or cooldown time, based both on query. So consensus, we intend to support hysteresis based on both query and or cooldown time. All agreed? Anyone disagreeing? So Björn, you don't find it perfect, but is it acceptable to what?
Yeah. I mean, I think my model covers that. It's just the most elegant way of formulating it.
I mean, as long as we know what we mean, Ben, if you want to link your masterpiece of a Jamboard, you need to. No. Okay.
Can I buy the rights to that NFT, Ben?
What?
I was offered to buy the rights so I could sell that Jamboard as an NFT, but we could discuss that offline.
You'll get easily 0 of whatever currency for this. Maybe you have to pay for getting rid of it.
Well, Prometheus is a blockchain.
No. Blocks are independent. You don't need. It doesn't matter. Sticking with the theme, better control of subquery alignment. It's like we keep going around PromQL stuff, so I think that makes sense. Björn, do you want to take this?
Sorry, which one is that?
Better control of subquery alignment.
Yeah, that's a cool one. Yeah. Have you? There's the paste. Okay. So subqueries. Subqueries are great. We all love them, but it makes people. It almost enables question like the one I put here, which actually has happened like 3 or 4 times now that users or customers have asked me that. So give me the average QPS of the same hour during the week over the last year, right? So people look at, they are now, whatever, it's peak time, noon, and they look at the rate query over the last 1 hour, totally legitimate. And now they want to know, is this now a lot or not? What's the average noon query load I have average over the last year, right? And then, of course, they also start to say, let's just give me Monday. Like today's Monday. I want all the Mondays average over the last year. And then you think that the query that is then the meeting notes would work. So I do a rate over an hour, and then I do an average over time over a year where I take this every week, right? Or every day if you want it for every day. That almost works. The only reason why this doesn't work is that the subquery is aligned. There I have linked the, I think it's a robust perception blog post. It's not a Prometheus blog post. Performance optimization. It's linked there. Yeah, it's a robust perception. So the reason is that, so we were super paranoid when we introduced subqueries that they would just be horribly slow because you have to evaluate everything every time. So the ingenious idea was we just align everything to multiples of Unix time of the right way, right? So that means that the subquery is always evaluated at the same multiple of the week. Essentially, it's always evaluated for the beginning of the week. Is it the beginning of the week? It doesn't like multiples of how many seconds a week have in Unix time. So that doesn't work, right? The subqueries is evaluated at those fixed times. And it kind of makes sense if you're not interested in those fixed times because it helps with performance. So I personally doubt that this performance optimization is actually that important in practical use cases. If you don't have it, it makes it much easier to create an abusive query that is just horribly expensive. But I think it's anyway very easy to create queries that are horribly expensive, even without that. Having said that, we can't change it right now without a breaking change. And the question would be, instead of waiting for Prometheus 3 and changing it, and then perhaps realizing the performance optimization was actually quite important, how about introducing a new syntax to say, yes, I know this is a performance drain, but I want the subqueries be aligned to now, right? And yeah, that's the idea, to just use a double colon would be the suggestion here. So then you have them aligned to the current evaluation timestamp.
I completely disagree with this because I think that the only correct answer to do the query you want is to use the step and the end parameter of the query. I don't think we should solve that specific issue within PromQL itself.
But you
It is-
can't, whatever step and end parameter you provide, the query, like if you write it in the first way, it will always be aligned to multiples of the Unix timestamp.
Yes,
Yeah.
but if you just run rate queries total 1 hour for 1 year with a step of 7 days, it will do exactly what you want.
And then you load it all into Python via CSV import and use your favorite programming language to calculate the average overtime on your own. Is that the suggestion? I mean, how can I create within PromQL? How can you give me the average load for this hour in the week over the last year? That's the question. And this is not contrived, right? I had at least 3 cases where people wanted this answer. And of course, you could run this is why we have subqueries, right? We don't need subqueries. You just run the query directly, and then you take the numbers from the HTTP API and do your math outside of Prometheus with your favorite programming language, stats tool. So the whole reason here is to do this within Prometheus.
So I am doing this now actually, but I am doing that in 9 PromQL queries with offset for the last 9
this is what
weeks.
people do, like what the users all have done. They create gigantic recording rules that do this explicitly, right? So they do an offset 1 week, plus offset 2 week, plus offset 3 week, blah, 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 plus offset 52 weeks, average over this. And this is okay if you generate this automatically. So one of the use cases is when we have to create queries to emulate features of other metric system. And we do this behind the scenes, so that's fine. And this is just, we have an internal channel, it's called Query Spam or something, where they exchange really hilarious PromQL queries that are just like pages long. And it would be great if you could just write a very short little query like this one, instead of auto-generating 2 pages long PromQL queries. Yeah. So, and it has happened often enough that I think we should enable it, especially if we can do it in a very non-invasive way, where like if users don't need this, they will never notice that this even exists.
But the question is, what happens with subqueries in subqueries?
Yeah, I mean, could you explain what the problem is there?
It's easy on the first level, but on the second level, I think this might lead into troubles.
It will be a multiplicity of calculations. This is the reason why we have the alignment, right? That you don't have a quadratic or cubic or hypercubic number of queries to evaluate if you do subqueries and subqueries and subqueries. That's why the more complicated syntax is the one where you have to consciously type a double colon. But I mean, personally, the query will just time out if it's too expensive, right? This also happens if I run a query that selects 100,000 time series and tries to average over a year. I don't see this actually as a big problem. Most of those queries are actually harmless because people just want, let's say, 52 data points, like in this case, right? That's easy. That would be really horrible if they want a subquery over every minute, and then the next subquery is over every 59 seconds, and then they get this whole multiplicity, and it all explodes. Sure, right? This is what we excluded by the alignment, but we also excluded certain use cases.
I have 3 short thoughts. I have needed this repeatedly in my professional life when I was still doing active operations for super weird and specific reasons. But when I needed it, I really, really needed precisely this. B, we do have a consensus that we want to add syntactic sugar and make it easier to hold Prometheus, to enable new users to use Prometheus. And C, this needs to be into at least 3 different feature flags, because we need to make super, like, I'm joking, but we need to make super clear that this is experimental, so no one dares rely on this precise behavior and syntax working in 3.0, which is a long version or a long way to say, I think we should absolutely explore this. Of course, it serves a valid need, but we should be super, super, super careful about not having anyone rely on the specific syntax, because I fear this will make it into many different systems and deployments and how-tos. Because it is so useful, and it's useful in so specific cases that we run the risk of having this in hidden places, and that person who wrote it went away, and then something goes boom. Like, that's the kind of thing I'm worried about. The rest, I think it makes sense to just do it and see if it explodes in interesting ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is so easy to implement that it's probably doesn't need to be signed off. The question is, would we merge this behind a feature flag if somebody put this into a PR tomorrow?
Let me make this a little bit more complicated. We can also find a consensus here and we can move on, but there is one of those things, again, industrial control systems, blah, blah, blah. You all know this is my spleen and I love this kind of thing. There is a concept of process. I think it's process repetition. Anyone who's into industry and listens to this, please excuse my half ignorance. Basically, where you need to have arbitrary time slices, where something happened, you produced these amounts of Mars bars, this amount of fabric, and I'm taking real world examples. You ingested this amount of coal into your harbor storage thingy, and this had these and that waves or graphs over time, and you want to overlay those precisely. And this is something which is super common. I had my last 10 production runs of that chocolate bar, which does not have a brand name, obviously. And I want to compare those last 10 runs with my current run, because if that one extruder is going too far out of spec relative to the ultra precise science of do whatever does not taste like shit, is going too far away from this, they might have a problem with their production and might need to throw away the complete batch, which would mean a dynamic alignment of different time slices over each other for different or for the same subqueries, but with completely different and dynamic and arbitrary time slices.
Do you want us to make this possible now in a brainstorm, or?
I thought of this as highly related to what we just discussed, and
I think with the add parameter you might even you can combine all of this, right? It might even be possible. I'm not quite sure.
You might be right. I mean, this is one of those things which I think is inevitable that it will be supported within Grafana, but I would much prefer if this was also, or if it was supported in Prometheus. So you can just write those kinds of things, and you then also can run alerts on this and everything. You're not tied to any visualization. You can just literally write an alert that the last 10 production runs of your permeable fabric is out of spec.
Yeah, I mean,
Christmas rush is
okay. Like the question is, can we get from
the other? I shouldn't have diverged, or I should, because.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's good that I did diverge, because your comment about the add is most likely correct. So I'm just going to write this into the meeting notes in a minute. But for now, let's find a consensus. Or actually, Julian,
if we should do this at all, because Julian was very convinced we should not do it.
Julian, are you with everything you heard just now? Are you actively against this, or are you just not convinced?
I mean, obviously, this would be behind a feature flag and could just get tossed away if it explodes horribly all the time.
No, we can have these, but we should still try not to do too many round trips. I don't see why we actually need all those round trips actually.
All those what? I didn't get that.
All
word.
I don't see why we need to run more evaluations because of this.
I think it's just you have more points in time at which you have to run this, right? Or is that what you mean?
No, you don't. I think that the issue that you need to run multiple times the same thing was because we considered query range as syntactic sugar for multiple instant queries, but this will break that promise, right?
No.
Because we will align this with the end of the query only. Or do you want to align this with every step?
This is aligned with the evaluation times of the average over time query. This is why I think the add can actually help with Richie's use case. You could say average over time at Monday morning, and then it would evaluate this query for every Monday morning.
But, well, are you speaking about Richie's proposal or the initial proposal of subquery alignment?
I think this will be an implicit effect if the double colon means this subquery is aligned with the evaluation timestamp.
Why don't we just align this with the end of the current query or the instant query?
That's what I'm saying, right?
No, you are saying evaluation time, so it's every step.
Yes, I mean, this has to be let me think. Yeah, I mean, this has to be the evaluation time step. Otherwise, we would actually break the promise, right?
I think we should break it.
And you think we should break it? No, I don't think we shouldn't break that promise because
it's already broken by the add timestamp.
No.
If you use add start, then you cannot do that in a instant query because the start value will be different each time.
Yeah, because you have a query parameter. I mean, you have something in the query that has this variability.
Yes, just like the double colon would be that, and it would break that promise. So we don't need to run like 10 times the same query.
Okay, but there's still this use case where I want to run this query also deliberately for Monday morning or for Tuesday morning or for Tuesday noon or for Monday noon. So I don't want this like there's no.
I don't see we can fix that with this one.
Why
I
not?
understand the issue because that's what we spoke earlier about the error budget, right?
No, this is a different thing, the error budget thing. That's where you actually want to be relative to a fixed point in time. Here, I don't want a fixed point in time, right? I just want the subquery not be aligned to multiples of Unix time. I want it to be aligned to the evaluation time.
Yeah, I think I would prefer if you align this with the end of the current query. So we don't need to run the underlying query a lot of times.
I think this will, again, not play well with the expectations, but.
Well, I don't see why. Especially like in the example that you have provided, 1 year and 1 week. 1 week is a multiple of 1 year, so at least you should have a short path to do that in that case.
It's not. 1 week is 7 days, a year is not a multiple of 7.
Indeed.
I mean, this can happen, and I think, I mean, the double colon means I submit as a user to this query might be horrifically expensive, which is a problem, but I don't think it's a problem that PromQL in general avoids. Just the contrary. That's why I don't think we should like reject this feature because it allows you to write overly expensive queries.
Actually, so I am doing that now. And if I do that in one query, it just does not run now. So, I mean, if I use OR and label replace to get different labels in one shot, in one recording role, it's too slow. So I wonder, like, if that query would even work. But yeah, okay, we can try it. But yeah, I would really still prefer that we do like, just like it is a range query that starts at the end of the current evaluation. A query range, and we take the vector out of that and just pass it to the function, the underlying function, and not running for every step.
It's just like, I mean, this emulates that you write a query that has 52 elements in a sum with an offset each.
It emulates that you run a query for 1 year with a step of 1 week, and then you pass all the results of that inside your rate function or your average over time function.
So, I mean, the query that the users who want this right now is rate queries total 1 hour offset 1 week, plus rate queries total 1 hour offset 2 week, plus rate queries total 1 hour offset 4 weeks, and so on until they reach 52 weeks. And this query is evaluated for every timestamp. Should they dashboard it, right? And that's, I think, what we should emulate here. I mean, to do like this query is more expensive, but not as expensive as it could be because you restrict the alignment again. I don't think. I mean, we want to remove this confusion that this is aligned in unexpected ways for performance optimization reasons. So I don't think we should do it again. I actually also, I don't think this will be often used in range queries. I think this is way more important for like alerting queries where they say, is this higher or lower than what I had over the last year, right? That's what people want to know.
It's actually super useful in range queries because then you don't need to extrapolate.
But with or without that alignment?
Without the alignment, you don't need to extrapolate and you can have exact numbers. You can have X-rate.
This is another thing, right? Yeah. But I'm not sure if that's, yeah, Victoria.
Well, you say it's not going to be used, and it will provide X-rate in a certain way, so it will be used.
And then we can even play with that and come to conclusions before we implement something new for X-rate.
I mean, if we accidentally allow more useful stuff to happen, that's arguably not a bad thing. As to the performance argument, we keep returning to this argument, and I fundamentally disagree with the argument that building a potential foot gun is inherently bad. If we're enabling new use cases and more powerful use cases, then obviously we need to give some guidance around it. And we get back to the whole self-care and integrated alerting and everything topic, but that is not inherently an argument against doing it. It's just an argument in favor of improving controls and self-care. But also, at least to me, it's more or less inevitable that we will end up at some point in batch processing of PromQL, be it through Prometheus or PromTool or something else. That's where every single database which is used in real hardcore production is moving to at some point. And in data science usage and such, it's just absolutely common. Yes, that means we need to split into different types of Prometheus. People shouldn't mix this aggressively, blah, 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 blah. But again, this is all stuff which we can give guidance on with documentation and with self-care alerting, but it is not an argument against doing it. On the contrary, it is an argument in favor of doing this carefully behind feature flags, so we know if we actually have a problem, if this has user uptake, if users actually run into problems, so we know if we need to optimize this or if this is good as is. So I think, Julian, your argument is actually precisely the conclusion. I come to precisely the other way in conclusion, that this is an argument in favor of doing it. Like, if someone is willing to do the work.
Okay.
Okay, then Ganesh will just create this in 5 minutes. I don't know. There might be something new.
Let's give him 4. He likes the challenge.
Just comment the alignment line and that's it.
I'm not. I think there might be some weird things happening, but it shouldn't be very hard.
Consensus. We want to enable this behind an experimental feature flag. All agreed? Anyone disagreeing? Julian, your thumb says yes, your face says, what have I done?
I have trouble with my eyes since last week, so.
Okay. We're at 5 minutes before. Should we end early or should I try and find something small?
I think this is also a good time to remind anyone in this call to send a talk to PromCon 2021 in North America.
Yes. There is a general slump currently in all the pre-events and everything KubeCon, but I also think this is in part due to the summer, because everyone who is in a region where COVID isn't completely vertical again is working on making it vertical again, as in take holidays. So yeah. There's a general slowdown, and as a reminder to everyone, also to the YouTube audience, I am always more than happy to give feedback and to help hone and polish your proposal. I have several different proposals open actually, which I need to give feedback on and just improve.
But maybe Jan is interested in submitting a talk.
Yeah, would be, but I don't have anything ready, so not this time.
We might have a PromCon for KubeCon China, which is slated to be a completely virtual event. So we have 3 minutes left. I think.
I would say we are also not very many, right? So it's not necessarily a good thing to murder as many topics as possible.
Yes, that is precisely what I was about to say. So now we need Kemal and Robert to say one thing where they have a strong opinion about Prometheus.
They're falling asleep.
Next time. But in all seriousness, feel emboldened and empowered to speak up. Okay. Then, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
See you next month, hopefully.
Yep.
And
bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
See ya.